I'm Paul Sturton, and I'm a Professor of the History of Modern Design here at the Bard Graduate Centre, and it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce Pat Kirkham, tonight's speaker. Now, it's customary when you start these introductions to say that the speaker needs no introduction, and usually that's fake. But I think tonight we can probably say that Pat, for most of the people here anyway, does not need an introduction, because, as most of you will know, the study of the decorative arts was not clear how it would develop, what we would do, how we would teach it, and what the various aspects of this slightly amorphous subject of decorative arts, design history and material culture would be. And at that stage, Pat had been teaching in Britain for some time and had indeed been one of the founders of this sub-discipline called the history of design. So it was very fortunate in a way that the director, Susan Webber, approached Pat to help shape the Bard Graduate Centre, and soon after that Pat came here to be one of the early professors and in a way shaped many of the things that we do, and I say that as much as a professor and teacher here as many of the students, that we operate within a framework that was set by people like Pat. And I don't see that framework in any way as a limitation so much as a way of working. Now, when Pat came here, she was primarily interested in mid-century modernism, and I think most people in this room will associate her with that. But Pat actually began her studies on 18th century British furniture, and I actually knew of Pat's work because of her writings on the English arts and crafts movement. But this focus on mid-century modern has dominated much of her work since she came to, well, before and since she came to America. And although I've had many conversations on the arts and crafts movement and a host of other things, she's come back round to one of her central preoccupations, which was, of course, Charles and Ray Eames. Since that, she's been working on a range of other European and American designers, above all Saul Bass, American women designers of the 20th century. But while these have taken her into other areas, they're all related to her central concerns with American design and its relationship to politics, popular culture, film, fashion, and the like. The way that all of these things are interconnected. Now, it's therefore, I think, great pleasure that Pat, while she's back here, is going to be returning to these very issues when she introduces us to, again, Charles and Ray Eames, but in this occasion, the Hollywood connection. So please join me in welcoming Pat Kirkham.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and it's nice to see everyone, a lot of old faces in the audience. It's good to be here, and I'm revisiting the Eameses. I thought I'd left them behind many years ago, and about 5 years ago, the Barbican Gallery in London started to prepare a big exhibition on the Eameses, and I got lured back into that, consulting with that, and began writing about the house. So I thought I would look at the house as a place where people came to visit, and I ended up writing something about their performance of hospitality and that sort of thing. And in the archives at the Library of Congress, they really recently catalogued the more personal and private papers of the Eameses. So all of a sudden, about 3 years ago, it was apparent that across these personal letters and all sorts of other new evidence and some more oral histories, that it was possible to write, as I had first thought about everybody who came to the Eames house. There's a book in just the Hollywood connection from that. And so most of you will know Charles and Ray Eames in terms of the Eames house, 1945 to 49, and their furniture. I mean, they also did exhibitions, interiors, toys, films, and multimedia projects. And I'm not really going to talk about them tonight, but I did just want to situate that. A film about them called The Architect and the Painter. Charles was trained as an architect and Ray as a fine artist. But in fact, what they end up doing together really crosses mainly design and film, and it's interesting for me that they're my two main areas of sort of historical research for many years. So let's hope this is working. Yeah, so 1941, 40 they meet, 41 they marry, and they're in a partnership, which most people I think would agree is probably one of the most creative design and filmmaking partnerships of the 20th century, till Charles dies in 78. So it's a long period of time. These are some of the Hollywood people that I found material about in the archive. I knew some of it before, but I haven't quite got that Robert Redford was a connection. It turned out that he offered them the solar film before he offered it to Saul Bass. I'd written about it with Saul Bass, but I didn't know that, and Robert Redford hadn't told me that when I spoke to him about it. I'm not going to talk about all these people, but you can just really to give you a size of the sort of magnitude of what I'm finding. So this is what my book is going to look like. I need to do an introduction where I'm going to talk about the Eameses and everything they did. And then I'm going to look at how they first connected with Hollywood. And then I'm going to look at certain circles. Alexander Knox and his wife Doris Nolan, both actors. Philip Dunn, a scriptwriter, and his wife, a former actor. And then Billy Wilder and his wife Audrey. Audrey, a sort of starlet, singer with the Tommy Dorsey band. And all of those groupings, lifelong friends from the early 40s through. The book will have quite a lot about blacklistings, since that's an old interest of mine since the 1960s. And because this project is really about friendships and networks of sort of friendships and affection and how they relate to work. You know, we're arguing last night. I think it's not just enough to say that people are in the same circle. What comes out of that? And so tonight I want to certainly buy about half time, and Paul's going to tell me when that is. I've got a football, I'm calling it half time. My team just got beat 5-0 in the Champions League this afternoon, so I've got football on the brain. I'm going to look at Billy Wilder, and I'm going to look at two films that the Eameses were consultants on, and they're really, I think, pretty interesting, and I'll be interested in your comments on them. I'm going to show some clips, and there's a few seconds of silence before the sound comes up. There's nothing we can do about that. And actually it doesn't matter because they come in perfectly on cue for what we want anyway. So just remember that when we're doing that. I'll be the one that really has to remember it. Okay, so one of the things I did when I wrote my first book on the Eameses was think, okay, they meet in 1940, but what did they do before? And Ray, it turned out, was a founding member of the AAA, the American Abstract Artists, in 1936. You know, they picket any gallery that won't show non-representational art. She is in the studio of Hans Hofmann from 1933 to sort of 39-40. She takes a bit of time out to look after her mother. And Ray kept an enormous amount of stuff. So there are 3 boxes at the Library of Congress from the 30s that show what film she went to, what art gallery she went to, what music concert she went to, and what play she went to. She seemed to be out a lot, that's for sure. It's possibly not everything, but we know an enormous amount. So at one level, she's seeing the type of, sorry, I have after 40 odd years of teaching and talking a lot, I have a bone voice box. she's seen the sort of standard sort of arty foreign films that I think most young artists in New York would have seen. We don't know if Charles saw these. It's quite likely that when he was at Cranbrook from 38 he was, but and again it's not always clear when Ray was, exactly when she was seeing those. She also really liked popular film. Her father ran a vaudeville theatre in Sacramento where she grew up, and that love of popular film and popular culture, popular performance, I think is actually, she has a much more Catholic taste at the end of the day than Charles, and it really is Catholic Ray's taste. So anyway, the standard, she goes to see Grand Hotel with Garbo and Barrymore, and then she Far Over England, the great British movie about the Armada. It's a couple of years before World War II, the Armada's coming in and we have to defend it, but here's the glorious Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh, and they will appear in this story a little bit later as well. So we know that Ray's seeing a huge amount of stuff, including this sort of, used to be called a docudrama, now it's called a ficto-documentary. The one that's thought to be an accurate representation of the people on the Aran Islands, but beautifully filmed. She saw Fred Astaire and his sister Adele dance on Broadway, bandwagon at the top there. And Ray was a trained classical dance, and in New York she took classes with Martha Graham and with Hanya Holm about modern dance, and talked about it as trying to find a way to, and this is how she and Charles always talked, to think about structure and movement and how they relate to one another. And there's a great letter from her to Charles in 1955. She just watched a rerun, I guess, of this 46 Ziegfeld Follies. And on the internet it's like, who do you vote for in the Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly debate? Who's the best dancer? Well, Ray is quite clear to Charles that Fred Astaire is superior at every level to Gene Kelly. And I do think that in a lot of their films, that the sort of the joy of the musical film and the joy of movement is something I'm trying to think around about what I think Ray brings to them. The archive has this great double portrait of Charlie Chaplin by Ray when she's 4 years old. I suspect the father was showing Chaplin movies, but if not, so that she's born 1912. There's a ton of Chaplin toys, jigsaws, goodness knows what. I mean, it was a huge industry. This was the most famous performer in the world at that time and for many years later. We know that she went to see Modern Times in 36 with her mentor and teacher Hans Hofmann, and that's in one of the AAA oral histories. And then in 51, she and Charles invite Chaplin to their home, just before Chaplin is not allowed back into the States. It's the height of vilification. It's in the middle of the Chaplin. He played tennis with Chaplin. But he did say to a friend of mine recently, no, but Charlie, meaning Charlie Chaplin, would have loved Charlie and Ray. So that's about as far as I've got on that one. I'm still trying to dig a bit deeper. But this was clearly a huge event for Charles and Ray to have Chaplin in their home. And I think it's there as a performer, but also as someone who their liberal politics made appealing to them. I won't talk more about this because I've got a ton of stuff to do. Charles, we know less about what he saw, but in 1941, in the early months after he's met Ray and they decided they're going to get married, and she leaves Cranbrook, academy where they've met, he's on a train going to meet people at Paramount to talk about one of the joint plans they have for the future. And they've got a plan to make a series of films. And it's funny, they're going to be on architecture, they're going to be on painting, the two things that they know about. Charles writes about them in a kind of strange way, saying if this won't be democracy, then I can't think what anything is. But we don't really know what he was going to say in this film series. Anyway, he's on a train and he's writing letters back to Ray and talking about this, that and the other. And around that time, in 41, he's also, we know, at Cranbrook, seeing this 1928 Matron in Uniform. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a wonderful film. It's erotic, lesbian, I was going to say subtext, but not really a subtext. A fantastic movie, and he comments that the two guys he's watching them with at Cranbrook really haven't a clue, they didn't get it. Then A Thief of Baghdad, which was a sort of spectacular fantasy film, and then John Ford's direction of The Long Voyage Home. And this is one of the few cases where Charles talks about Ford filming. He said this guy's not frightened of silence, and he's not frightened of black. And I can't. And he talks that says that he thinks he deals with those things masterfully, and then says he wants to see it again. And I think it is one of the sort of lesser known Ford films now. And if you want to watch it, I would recommend it. And then Charles at Cranbrook, he goes there in 1938 as a fellow to sort of read for a year, and then ends up kind of starting and running an industrial design department. They give him a commission to make a documentary really about the college, and we don't know that much about it, but it seems there are a few odd clips. Wonderful images of Margie Grotel, the potter. She made enormous pots, and Charles has got this great photo of her because her hands look as enormous as the pots and things. And I know that he and her were great friends, but I kind of like this image because it's, man with a movie camera. For my point, however, though, the picture of the woman next to him at the top, Frances Rich, is also a student at Cranbrook. She's the daughter of Irene Rich, who's a woman laughing her head off in the next image. But she has also acted in Hollywood movies. She's been in sort of 6 small movies, one of which is by John Ford. So Charles is there. Some people saying he's having an affair with her before he has an affair with Ray. I'm not sure, it doesn't seem like it, but so he's already with people who are in that Hollywood world. Frances Rich forsakes Hollywood in sort of 33 for art. And to cut a long story short, and this is where the connections in commissions come in, Irene Rich, who's by then a radio star as well, pots of money, she commissions a new studio in the guest house from Charles. And he goes in the summer of 1940 to talk about that to their estate in Santa Barbara. And it's the following year when he's going again to talk to them about this commission that he's then, knowing that him and Ray, I think, already deciding to move to California, he's trying to pitch this thing to Paramount. Paramount think it's too wacky. And Rich's mother thinks the designs for the studio really are too modern for her taste. So really, he and Ray arrived in LA in July of 1941, and Charles needs to get some work because they haven't got very much money. Ray had a tiny private income. And the connection is that the richest friend, and Catherine Hepburn, I think, is born 1997, probably the same year as Charles. So they asked Catherine Hepburn to help Charles find a job in the movie business. And her former lover, Leland Hayward, lots of books are now saying also that Frances Rich is a long-term lesbian love of Catherine Hepburn's as well. So the side alleys of this research are also really interesting. So it's Leland Hayward who's then the biggest agent around, and he's also has Fred Astaire on his books and Ginger Rogers. So I just think Ray would have just loved this becomes a lifelong friend. His best pal is Jimmy Stewart, and we see them, I'm trying to work out the number of years, 16 years later in a major project with Billy Wilder and Charles. So he gets Charles a job at MGM, and Charles is only there for 9 months. And there's a lot of people who want to just claim him as the great art director. And it's very obvious from oral histories of people who knew him there, and one woman in particular who was a designer there, who's just saying no, who's in the drawing office, which is really what Charles said. And although they would sometimes say he was a set designer, Ray made it pretty clear to me it was pretty small fry stuff he was doing. And those of you who are into Cedric Gibbons's set designs for MGM, you'll recognise this. This is actually a hat shop scene. This is Mrs. Miniver during the war, supposedly cheering herself up with a new hat. This film is sort of supposed to be set in England and things. And Charles was given this, but it's clearly he's had to design it in that sort of art moderne MGM style. So no wonder he wasn't very happy and couldn't wait to get out of there, because what he wanted to do by then, their main project, is to carry on the plywood furniture project that he'd started with Eros Arnon in 1940. So that's really, as soon as they get enough money to do that, by about the spring of 41, 42, he's out of there, and they've got a small little workshop barn in Santa Monica, and this is where they start making plywood. I haven't showed lots of pictures of plywood furniture, and I show them with their war work because this image, and think of this beautiful curve here. Paul, do you know when MoMA acquired the big piece that they had? I think the Eameses kept this probably till they died. They kept a lot of other stuff. So the woman at the top left here, Percy Harris, a British designer, moves over from Britain during the war where there's no work, and she's designing the Olivier Vivian Leigh production of Romeo and Juliet. And Alexander Knox is about to become the Eames' best friend as the priest. And this is him here as, and he lends Vivian Leigh and they're lovers by then, but not married because they're married to other people. And Knox, we know, lends them his aunt's sort of retreat so they can have these weekends away. For our story, as soon as Charles and Ray open their own workshop, Harris herself leaves MGM, where she's been getting a union card to stay in the US during the war, and works on this plywood project. And Ray talked to me about how great she was because she knew how to cut patterns and things and taught them that sort of thing. She is one of the greats of British stage design. Gielgud used her for so many things. Anyway, by the time the Eameses meet Alexander Knox in 1941, he's an Academy Award nominated actor, but they meet him because he is interested in furniture. He's an amateur furniture maker, and he asks Percy Harris how to do something that he was making. I don't know what it was, a table or something. He's having a problem. So she said, why don't you ask Charles Eames? And so some people have suggested the Eames are sort of like Hollywood groupies. It's virtually the opposite. Charles hated parties. He hated more than 6 people. And all of their Hollywood friends say, well, no, he never really came to those parties where we had a lot of people. He went to one where I think Humphrey Bogart was once, when his daughter, by his first marriage, wanted to go mix with the stars, but otherwise not. Okay. So Alexander Knox then marries Doris Nolan, who is reasonably successful in Hollywood in the 30s, but pretty much gets fed up with the sort of parts they're offering her And I think by the time that they all meet up in about 41, is pretty much, no, she's not going to do that anymore. But like a lot of the sort of glamorous Hollywood wives, she poses in a lot of Eames, I think more internal ads and things, and they do a lot of photography of chairs, people sitting on them, but they use really, as part of their research process, looking at things in a new way through photographing them. Through Alexander Knox and Doris Nolan, they meet Philip Dunn and his wife, and there's a really nice oral history by his wife. He said, "Oh, I sat down next to this woman, I didn't know who she was. She said she liked my little slippers," and we talked. And it turned out Philip Dunn had sat down the other side of the room to Charles, and then they, spoken not about film, but about something else. And she remembers this sort of argument about how you feed the world, because I think there was a lot of fancy food there, and Charles is saying this is a disgrace, people are starving. And you get again another little side picture of the sort of, not quite, politics with a small p, really. So here's Dunn, his two most famous, How Greenland's Five Valley is famous. The Elvis is there really because I like Elvis Presley. But script writing and directing. And he was a well-known liberal, not pro-communist at all, but we'll see during the Red Scare, people just treat him as if he is one. And that's pretty much, I think, how the Eames' friends are, really, I would say, liberal. Rather than anything more radical. And this is Amanda Dunn, called the most beautiful ingenue in Hollywood, and she really did get some crummy parts and opted out much more quickly than the others. And this is the first real commission in a way. The Dunns have a new house in Malibu that they're kind of furnishing. It's really interesting if the Eameses are your friends, you just say to them, I'm thinking about having a new baby, and I really want to turn the study into something else, and then something, and then they have another baby, and, we're back again to ask these sort of questions, lots of good free advice sort of thing. So anyway, in 51, Philip Dunn's going on location with a film called Way of the Gaucho to Argentina. And while he's away, the Eameses redo his office. And for those of you who know the Eames house, you can see this, the seating is very much like the Eames alcove. They have the same Zoronen chair that the Eameses had, and then they use bits of Eames storage units. I won't do this in detail because it's not the most important thing here for me tonight. The Dunns also have a lot of Eames furniture, some given, some I don't know how much they bought. And in the archive it's as glorious, it's in colour, these are just the crummy photos from the archive, are just my working things. It's their daughter Miranda, a baby queen and her Eames cabinet, and Philip writes on the bottom just, how much he really likes that. So they grew up with this, and there are 3 daughters. And they also pose in Eames chairs. And this is the next 2, the Philippa and Jessica, they all end with A's. And this is Philippa later working in the Eames office. And just yesterday I made contact with her because she's a Bard College alum. And finally, none of the phone numbers Bard had were working at all, but finally an old email got to her. It was like, I think I'd written to her 3 years ago or something. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get back to you anyway. That's a happy story for me. And here's Amanda, again in one of the official Herman Miller ads that we didn't really know was designed by Ray, I think. We assume these are somebody else, but certainly people in the Eames office having a big input into that. And it's when the Dunns go to Argentina they have some film-making equipment. So although Charles and Rafe talked about it in 41, about wanting to make films together, they haven't done anything about it. They've been too busy doing plywood furniture, plastic furniture, and wire furniture, toys, all of those other things, building themselves and designing a house. But on the basis that they've got a bit of equipment, and Charles always loved making tools to do things, they make their first film, which was never finished, called Travelling Boy, and it was shown in what we think its entirety at the Barbican last year for the first time. And then this one, Parade, 1952 in Blacktop, and they instantly sort of win Best Film at Edinburgh Festival and things like that. Half an hour, right, I'm moving along. And the other thing that's just interesting to me is that they get involved with the UPA Cartoon Company, and they're making a lot of films. They buy shares in this company. They're so excited by it. Little Rage is completely gone. And again, this is another commission that doesn't come to anything. But for this Gerald McBoyne goes to Planet Mu, or yes, that's the name of the film. They decide, because they've been making toys, they're going to make the spacecraft. And this character has a voice that's stranger than mine, and he only makes noises, not words. And there's a lot of information about the Tigeret Toy Company working through their engineers, solve all the problems, and then it never comes to anything. So this is a lot about some design projects that don't come to anything, but I think we here at the BGC think these are as worthy of looking at as anything else. And then they hire somebody from the UPA to work in their office, and you see the impact of that on their own films. Then, this is a prelude up into the Red Scare, really, but through Knox and Nolan, they meet a producer called John Houseman, and this is him here with Orson Welles. They found the Mercury Theatre, in the 30s. They do the first all-black Macbeth, and here we have Julius Caesar set in sort of fascist Germany and Italy. It's not really quite clear which. And the guy who's playing Cinna the poet, is this guy, Norman Lloyd, who's, as I said, still around and very lively at 100. But Houseman really becomes a friend in his own right, and he works with the Eameses right through different projects. They give him the big project that Kennedy gives to them on immigration, and it's because the Eameses are so far behind what they're doing for the 1963-64 World's Fair. They hive it off onto John Houseman, and I think it's called Voyage to America. And that's, again, we have to think, what would it have been like if the Eameses had made it? So, the Dunn House up in the Malibu Cliff is a big sort of salon centre for the left liberals of Hollywood. So people there are seeing Eames furniture all the time. They're also seeing it at the Coronet Art Centre Theatre here. And this is John Houseman's memoirs. But when in Norman Lloyd's memoirs, he says that Charles and Ray donate this. Then, 1947, Bertolt Brecht and Charles Lawton reworked Brecht's Galileo. It premieres there at the Coronet Theatre. 260 people packed in. It's apparently blazing hot. And this is the only photo I can find of the opening night. And I'm going, oh my God, were Charles and Ray there? Were they? And I'm recounting this at the Library of Congress. And the wonderful archivist goes, yes, she kept the programme. So we know they were there, and the news report saying, the A-list Hollywooders, the avant-garde and the intelligentsia. So that's just the sort of level they could be working at, except that they don't like the party part, and I think that's an important part. So, as you know, the Galileo stories about the Inquisition, about forced confessions, about recanted confessions, and this is at the height of 47 of the House on Un-American Activities, already within a few weeks, naming and calling, serving subpoenas on 19 Hollywood people and then calling 11, and Brecht is one of the 11. And he goes in front of the committee, and then he flicks off to Germany the next day. And it's the other 10, who I'm pretty interested in a minute. And the committee to defend what becomes the Hollywood 10 is Alexander Knox, Philip Dunn, and then John Huston and William Wyler. John Huston has been hearing that the Eameses are making a house for Billy Wilder, and he asks them, I want them to make one for me. He's saying, well, you better ask them yourself. And they say no, they've got other things that they want to be working on. So far, Alexander Knox is very clear that this note paper and the graphics are by the Eameses for that committee. This is the only thing we found. And then there's you know these famous pictures of Bogart and Bacall leading the demonstrations in Washington. It all falls apart, of course, in a dreadful, dreadful mess. And for our story again, one of the Hollywood 10 is the brother of one of the Eames' close friends, who has just a few weeks earlier won an Academy Award for the first film about anti-Semitism in the US. This is the sort of period we're dealing with. And it's interesting for me in the Eames archive, this is the brother, this is Alan Scott, that's Aidan Scott, and Charles, Alexander Knox. The Eames' photos of them are on the beach. And I've been trying to think about friendships, here's a situation, all of their friends, every single one of their friends thinks towards getting there next. And what's going to happen? Do they need to leave? Alan Scott spends his time writing scripts for Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies. On the other hand, suddenly he's out of work because his brother is. I'm going to cut all of this short. And so I'm trying to wend my way through. I don't want to regurgitate the history of the blacklist. There's I don't know how many million books on it. I do like reading them. But the Knoxes in particular, and Ray spoke at some famous meeting over lunch when I bumped into her in New York once. I think it was Dieter Rams, the famous European designer, asked her about the Red Scare. She just said, I won't say anything else. I said it was the most horrendous moments of our lives. And so their very best friends end up leaving to go to Europe. But she's pregnant when Alexander Knox uses their phone number for the committee's propaganda. And she's less political than these guys, but she understands, I think, the severity of what's going to happen. The child is born, and Charles and Ray do 2 rebuses for them, and this is from a much, much later photo in their house in England. And they're also, this is for the baby, and there's monkeys, and there's toys, and there's all sorts of things for this baby. And they also decide that they will design a rocking version for a mother and baby, but this child is rather large by the time the Eameses get around to doing that. So it's this way of, I think, being normal, of going to do the normal things they do with their friends, which is picnics on the beach, helping them through. And there's a letter before this baby's born saying, dear baby, we hope you'll be so nice to your parents because they are having an absolutely terrible time. And it's sort of sifting this through. And then this is Alan Scott's daughter, Peppa Scott, who's now a big human rights activist, became an actress. She has written recently about how the family just falls apart. You know, parents don't know what to do. She's had this privileged lifestyle till she's like 13, and then what's going on, you know? Parents have no work, her uncle's in jail, blah, blah, blah. And the Eameses do two things. Charles eventually, because her mother keeps asking them, Charles goes to her high school and talks. And Ray sends the corsage at graduation and things. And there's all this, you know, documentation about that. So I'm thinking about how, you know, what friendships mean at a moment when just simply by knowing these people yourself could be investigating. So I think there's probably an FBI file on the Eameses. And then Philip Dunn and Gregory Peck, both well-known anti-communist liberals, but I don't know if you can read this. It says basically, this picture written and acted by known Reds, don't patronise, Gregory Peck, Philip Dunn, 1951. John Huston is kind of running past a picket line here. Alexander Knox has already gone to Europe. And this is the kind of moment that I think Ray was talking about when she just said it was this nightmare period. And then it turns out their little innocent film about toys is also banned in Arizona somewhere. Oh no, sorry, Arkansas, because the balloon that floats free at the end is red. So this is part of the red scare. Right, and I am hopping on from this. I want to get on to Billy Wilder. So Wilder, interested in furniture, bought Bauhaus stuff before he left Germany in 1933, and was one of the first people to order a production line of the 46 plywood chairs. We don't know the relationship goes back any further than that. And then there's this photograph in 51 of him trying out this prototype for the much more famous 1956 lounge chair Ottoman, usually said to be made for, designed for Wilder, who was always saying to them, why the hell don't you make a comfortable modern armchair? In fact, that wasn't specially designed for him, but this one was. Wilder then always gave that chair as a present when somebody did something important, like when this guy wins an Academy Award for that. And in the archive I found the first drawings for this when Charles was in Newfoundland filming with Billy Wilder, and Wilder always napped on very long benches, and so it's a pretty miserable drawing, but I was very excited to find the original drawing for the shares. The Wilders' honeymoon with the Eameses in 1949, when the Eameses are designing this huge house for them. It's about 5 times as big as the Eames house. Billy Wilder's, well, always funny, but it said to me, no, I got a bit carried away. I began to go to Medici prints. A huge art collection. And Ray writes really nicely about the Wilder collection. This is her working on the house, and at the bottom, when they decided not to go, the Wilders decided not to go ahead with the house, they asked for something to kind of shade them as a sort of portable porch, and the Eameses come up with that. And then this is them at home in the Eames house, having a wonderful, wonderful time with Audrey Wilder looking, I think, completely resplendent with this dress that looks like it's about to drop off it in any second. The cement between the 4 of them, I think, is really strong. It's around furniture and design, because, and Wilder, I think, is the only person who's probably more obsessive than the Eameses in terms of their friends. And he certainly was a more obsessive collector, and they were pretty crazy collectors, you know. And he was honest in the sense he called himself a collector. Charles and Ray always said they weren't, they just had these millions of toys because it was really interesting and you could tell things from toys and all of this. We don't know much about the Eames' first apartment, but they had this called a stable, and in about 1950-51 they swapped it with Wilder for these two African objects that most people today would call stools. And Wilder always laughs, saying, well, I got the best of that bargain in terms of money, because as they called it, became, I can't remember how much it fetched at one of his auctions someone before he died. But it's also, I think, important in terms of the Eames' sort of changing interest in the sort of objects that grab them, and I think giving more and more rein to their interest in what we would call craft subjects. Then with Wilder, they get to go on any film set they want, any time they want, it seems to me. And somebody in the Eames office said Charles would always love to steal things like matchbooks, German matches that they were using for Stalag 17. They would come back to the office with these things. And then, this is Sunset Boulevard, 1950, and Ray must have been on the set because she talks about how Gloria Swanson sort of pushes the performance through, because it's a hell of a part, a hell of a dramatic role. And then Wilder presents her with this, and the Eameses make it. I don't know what, Ray was really into surrealism, as Wilder was, and whether the Eameses concocted with them or whatever, I don't know. But we have this photographic evidence, and we know it was presented to her when the film ended. Then Charles does location shooting for Ace in the Hole, and that's a big job. Again, he's away from the office a lot, so again, it's partly, I might have written 20 years before, Ray did a lot when Charles was away. Well, he was away a hell of a lot when, particularly in the 50s, with Wilder. And then they both go on location with Wilder, watching him shoot in Albuquerque. And then on the right we have Wilder directing Audrey Hepburn in Sabrina. And there are only a couple of shots of the set of Sabrina. But what strikes me with both of them is a really respectful distance. And I've been on film shoots with friends, and you have to keep a respectful distance. You're not there to let me get a great picture of whoever it is. And I really notice that about the series of things. And here we are. Here is Leland Hayward, the old agent, a fantastically wealthy producer by then. He produced South Pacific on Broadway and went on to produce West Side Story on Broadway. Many, many hits. And then this is Charles Lindbergh, about the films about him, and then Wilder. And then here we have, in the Smithsonian, with a plane, Wilder, Leland Hayward, and Jimmy Stewart, who begs to have the part. He's like 25 years older than Lindbergh was. And he does anything, I'll lose weight, I'll dye my hair blonde, I'll have to fly this plane. And this was Warner Brothers' big production. 6 million on just the planes and the props alone. And they thought it was going to make a fortune. And I think Charles and Ray did too. And they did some very ambitious work on it. Charles was out of the office for months and months at a time. And these are some of Charles's photographs. These were the second unit photography. I think 6 or 7 different countries. You don't see them all in the final film, but some beautiful images. And I just put this back again because I'm going to show you some clips. There are 2 montages within the movie that the Eames has made, and so you won't get sound immediately, okay? And if any of you know Eames films, you'll recognise some of this is just how Ray moved pieces of card around constantly. And this predates the films they made about their own work that takes a lot of these same elements. one on the fiberglass chair. It's very similar. Billy Wilder reckoned that if Charles Eames had directed a Hollywood movie, he would have been as good as anyone else. He really reckoned his eye behind the camera. Right, now I have to go to the next one. Same thing, don't expect words. Come on. Right, here we are. So that's that shape. This is this plywood format I used with. It's like a wire chair. So at this stage the Eames have only really been making films for 4 or 5 years. And this appears directly almost in other Eames films. And then this comes up in sort of the modernist circle that we Then, I don't want to dwell on this, but this is very amusing. There's this boring flight, many, many hours over the Atlantic, and there's a fly that, in order to add dramatic interest, they haven't talked to himself and they haven't talked to a fly. And there's this great letter in the Eames archive from the secretary in the Eames office to some lad in the University of California asking for blowflies. So there's blowflies. Then there was a reply saying, oh, the mice are eating all the blowflies, we can no longer help you. We're sorry. But then, that was in manuscripts, in the film and photography department of the Library of Congress, there are these stills of these what look like dead, or are they mechanical flies? So here they are. I don't know, but it's the extent to which Charles took on his consultancy roles for this film were very extensive. I'm not going to say any more. As the world held its breath, the screen has never come so close to the heart of a man. And this is how the trailer runs. The Eameses actually were going to make the trailer, and I didn't know that when I read the script. And I thought it was like for one of their little educational films for schools. It was really boring. First of all, and it was called, what's it called? Oh, it looks easy on the screen. It's like, it'll be all right on the night. First we have a director, then we have a producer, blah, 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 and it goes on. And I'm sure they would have been those beautiful images, and there's a little bit of evidence. And then the boys from Warner's come in and go, the script will not do, and try and get them to work around this, and that there's enough copies at different moments of this, and in the end, the Eameses don't do it. What they did have in mind to do as well, and there's a small series of photographs, and these are full-size trucks that open up to have the planes unfold. This went, again, thought through to quite an nth degree. And the idea was that this would be publicity for the film, and it would be move around the United States like a circus, Charlton Ray's great love. This exhibition would move around as the film went from success to success. And of course the film was a flop, so there's no way that Warner Brothers is going to fund that. But they bring in Alexander Girard to work on it because they are so bereft of time, and there's some very interesting information about that. And I think, to me, it's a very, very imaginative exhibition. And then, at the same time, while there's 2 films come out in '57, Spirit of St. Louis and Love in the Afternoon, and these are Ray Eames' graphics. Unfortunately, the film is in black and white, so these are the actual titles. And Ray develops a whole new graphic alphabet as well. and she's going to New York for talks with the advertising people and things. So that was a nice find. And then lots and lots of connections with Wilder, but particularly in the Eames' House of Science, 1962. He brings in, he gets some June Shawcross, who was from Some Like It Hot, she's a band leader. And then in 1959 in Moscow, not only does he get that Marilyn Monroe wink that's so important in making America look like a sort of glamorous place for the Russians, but also the original intention was that was going to be Billy Wilder, Charles and Ray Eames and George Nelson all to work on it. And Wilder drops out, and then I think Charles just cuts George Nelson out. And I just want to end by looking at these two movies. I was watching The Moon is Blue because it was by Otto Preminger, and he reputedly got Sylvass to do some trade ads, and this is, I don't think, is one of them. But I was watching the movie, and in it there's a prototype that we saw Billy Wilder bouncing up and down on. So if it's a prototype, how do the set designers get that? They've got to know the Eameses, or they've got to know Wilder. So I spent ages and ages working out, when they, because the set designers later did work for Wilder, but not at this time. And this is not a Wilder movie. This is, oh God, who's this again? It's Otto Preminger, and yeah, I can't remember the set designers. So this is interesting to me for two reasons. One is that the leading actress bears an uncanny likeness to Ray Eames and wears clothes like Ray Eames, these Peter Pan colours. So does this mean whoever's sort of staging this has got Charles and Ray as a model, or is it just that Charles and Ray are quite cool looking in 1953? I don't know. And I won't. What is clear about this movie is that as well as the prototype, which was in the office of William Holden, who plays an architect called Don, and the next one we're going to look at, William Holden plays a furniture designer called Don, and it's a year later. So we have particularly the wire chairs of 1951, so they're only probably been in magazines for no more than a year and a bit. And this is a Herman Miller ad for the same things. And so I go to the Library of Congress and I said, have you got anything on the Moon is Blue? How did you know? No one else has ever asked that. So I said, well, I saw this prototype, and they just have one sheet, but it says what Charles and Ray lend to the movie, which is a load of blueprints that you actually never see. You see them sort of lying on the table or something, but it's a blueprint of the Wilder house, all of the stuff that they're working on. So it's almost like, take this from our office and use it. And the next consultancy is much more formal. There's a lot more material, and certainly more archive material. And this one is John Houseman, their old friend, and it's the executive suite of a very popular novel at the time by an executive who had worked at Armstrong Tiles, and they did a bit of cabinet making. And this is interesting to me anyway. William Holden plays a furniture designer who is designing Eames furniture. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That's a photograph from the Eames office. And I'm going to play you the sort of finale of the film, and it's very Eamesian in terms of some of the pleas for well-made, well-designed furniture at a price affordable to all. We know, however, from the memos between the Eameses and Houseman that there's one problem for Charles Ray, is that this man is a furniture designer, but he's also junior executive. And without a spoiler, he actually becomes company president. And what we'll see in the last scene is the sort of argument that wins him that vote. Charles and Ray say, are you joking? This man has no idea how to run a company. You know, he does nothing. He might be a good designer, but we know, we work with Herman Miller, we know what you need to be to run a good company. And so I wanted to get that out of the way first, because to just tack it on the end sort of spoils the end of my presentation. Anyway, here's William Holden trying to get rid of all the old styles from the firm, but also bad making practices. And this is a link back to the arts and crafts movement and those sort of that ethos with the Eameses. And Charles and Ray are consultants. This is the factory that made their plastic furniture. The film never says that they're making plastic furniture, but in the middle of it you can see the fiberglass, look. You know. And so they either go to Zenith factory, the Zenith Plastics factory, or else, and I can't see they would move all that machinery. So they're making all of this stuff happen for their friend John Houseman. And then there's one scene, and you can see the change in the scripts. It's almost like the production team go to visit the Eames house and come back with all this loot. This is almost all from Charles and Ray Studio, and those of you who've been in my classes will know. I mean, there's only 3 pieces of the sculpture. There it's there. This is all of their stuff. This chair, which again is a prototype, that's that. This is their circus pieces, you know, almost everything. I became a bit obsessive myself about this at one stage. And again, the deck chair type things, again, somebody might have had one, but Charles and Ray had exactly the same ones. And, but not put together in a way that's at all sensitive to how Charles and Ray would have done it. I keep wanting to, you know, rearrange it, but the paper, well, you can see everything. So not only are they lending a few blueprints, they're lending just about everything. And in the scripts, in the Academy of Motion Pictures library, it really doesn't say very much. And then the script is rewritten to kind of match this after they decided to go with this. And then this is what we're going to end with, which is Charles having doubts. William Holden. Donald. That really was a wrong use. Having doubts about this crappy stuff. And here's the great, you know, Jacques Hughes moment. And if this works, the sound comes in exactly when I want it, so you're not actually missing anything.
Why shouldn't a man have pride? Concerning it.
All right. But why should that set him apart from the people he's working with?
The force behind a great company has to be more than the pride of one man. It has to be the pride of thousands. You can't make men work for money alone. You starve their souls when you try. And you can starve a company to death the same way.
Everybody must have known it.
Sorry, the sound's a bit uneven.
But he was a little lost these last few years. The company had been saved. There were no more battles to win. Now he had to find something else to beat his pride. Bigger sales, more profit, something. And that's when we started doing things like this. KF line. Walter, your boys proud when they go out and sell this stuff? When they know the finish is going to crack, the veneer split off, and the legs come loose?
Wait a minute, that's price merchandise. It serves a definite purpose in the profit structure of this company. We're not cheating.
Ourselves. At that price, the customer knows exactly what he's going to get. This? What trickery has come to me? And what do you suppose the people think of us when they buy? How do you suppose the men in the factories feel when they want it? What must they think of a management that's willing to strip to selling this kind of junk in order to add a dime a year to the dividend? You know there are men at Pike Street who refuse to work on the KF line? Who've taken a $7.50 a week cut to get transferred to something else?
Well, after all, that's only part of our business. Eventually, we can cut down on the line.
We'll drop that line.
And we'll never again ask a man to do anything that will
pride in himself or his work. We'll have a line of low-priced furniture, a new and different line. As different from anything we're making today as a modern automobile is different from a colored wagon. That's what you want, Walt, is it? What you've always wanted? Merchandise that will sell because it has beauty and function and value? Not because the buyers like your scotch or think you're a good egg. The kind of stuff that you, Jesse, will be able to feel in your guts when you know it's coming off your production line. A product that you'll be able to budget to the nearest hundredth of a cent short because it'll be scientifically and efficiently designed.
That was one line that Eames put in to make it sound like he knew what an executive could be talking about.
We're going to give the people what they need, and prices they can afford to pay. And as fresh needs come up, we'll satisfy them too, with something new and even more exciting. And when we achieve that, we'll really start to grow. We're not going to die, we're going to live. And it's going to take every bit of business judgment and creative energy in this company, from the mills and the factories right to the top of the tower. And we're going to do it together.
Okay. So, I'm just going to leave you since it's almost Christmas with Ray's graphic ending and an Eames holiday cake. I kept to time, so
Yes.
we have some final questions.
Yes. So, any questions from this tour of Hollywood in mid-century?
Did the Eames work suffer because of the blacklist?
No, I mean, I think it's interesting across the blacklist who suffers most, and I think it's, you can be a scriptwriter, even if they're blacklisted, some of them write under assumed names. I mean, I think they just weren't important enough then, that they weren't working for Hollywood, because mainly the blacklist goes after public servants, school teachers, and people, goes after the film industry. What's the other one? There are three kind of main people that it goes in. So they're not really in the entertainment industry, they're just around those people. But I know that Saul Bass's first wife was in the Communist Party, and his second wife said, and this is sort of confidential really, but that when she was first seeing Saul, that she had a former boyfriend who came and said, look, who worked for the FBI, and he said, look, you're being followed and things. And at that level, if she was being followed, then I can't think that Charles and Ray weren't at that moment, but that's up to the family whether they decide, to look into that. And as I say, all of their friends were liberal, but it's and even Adrian Scott had been in the Communist Party and left about a year and a half before the HUAC House of Un-American Activities stuff. So it's more part of that hysteria thing. And actually Philip Dunn had been called in front of HUAC as early as 1940, and he thought he had defended himself. And then when America went to war, he knew how to fly, so he volunteered, and he said he'd always thought as war was approaching that's how he would, do his heroic bit for his country. And somebody in the working of that out just told him, the reason you're not being passed is because you're on a blacklist, there's FBI files on you. So he made a huge fuss in 1940 and tried to get them and couldn't. Worked in the Office of War Information, and then in 46, filming abroad with somebody, they then said again, somebody else, there's a file on you. He tried to get it again, and he reckons the only reason he didn't get nabbed was that first he had a big profile as an anti-communist, but so did Peck. And actually so did Knox was very much against any dogmatism. It's this very much that individualistic liberal, really, they're friends. Anyway, Dunn didn't get his till the 80s when you could get them, and he sorted that out. And then in about 54, Alexander Knox suddenly in Britain was offered a role in a movie and was kitted up for his costume and everything, and then suddenly it was like it dawned on somebody at Paramount, oh my god, this guy's up, it's really a grey list. And so he was in communication with Philip Dunn, because Philip Dunn said a lot of these people who'd been making false accusations, but who were linked with the FBI, actually, if you paid them enough money, they could get you your files. And in the end, Knox just said, I'm never going to go back there. I'm just, we'll stay where we are, and didn't follow that up. So,
on a different point.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed it. It wasn't clear to me if I know there's a lot of ready-made materials that were put into the films, but did they actually design anything specifically for any of them, for any film? I mean, actually design a set?
No. Their friend George Nelson designed the set, and their film's escaping me at a minute, but it's Jane Fonda's in it. She gets it. He uses it in Eames.
So they used material. They used their furniture.
Yeah.
But they never actually took over the whole.
No, because
process.
they never worked as Hollywood set designers
In any form. Yeah.
No, and so when they're consulting, they're just helping the set designers. I mean, can you imagine Ray and Charles? It would probably have taken forever to set up one set, Hollywood had to do it really quickly. You see somebody just shoving all their stuff into that studio for when it's June Allison who plays the wife in an executive suite.
So they never had their name on any of the credits?
Just as montage for Spirit of St. Louis, but it's really an interesting question, because what do you call them, this consultant, and you have to be really careful that you don't tread on anyone else's toes. And I knew about that already because of working on Saul Bass and his connections with Alfred Hitchcock. And also there's a really nice letter from the production designer for West Side Story, saying, well, Saul Bass does the titles, Saul Elaine Bass do the opening dance choreography, people know that. They're going to think I did nothing in this film, but I actually was a main production designer. So what do you then call Saul Bass? Do you call him pictorial consultant? He liked visual consultant. The Eameses from Warner Brothers, they called him both photographic consultant and production consultant. And I can't work out if he's directly answerable to Leland Hayward, or if he's answerable really to Billy Wilder, or both, because they're pals, And there's a list of who goes on the location shoots. And it's Billy Wilder, Leland Hayward, James Stewart, 1, 2, 3, and there's a few more people. And Charles is like about number 8 or 9, depending on the plane. So they see it's important, and he's paid directly by Warner Brothers for all those months that he's working away and things. And I don't know if there's any Warner Brothers archive.
Nothing spilled over into theater at all.
Well, I cut it out because of time tonight, but it's interesting to me that so many of their friends who were in Hollywood from the 30s onwards were also in theatre. And Alexander Knox, and he's Canadian, had been on the stage in Britain in the 30s. That's how he knew Olivier, and people was doing very well when he came to Hollywood. He knew Tyrone Guthrie at the Old Vic, and Percy Harris's brother-in-law was George Devine, who started the Royal Court Theatre. So they have really this connection through their friends with the creme de la creme of British theatre. And so when they're in London, they're going to Devine's opera, they're going to Devine's plays. Tony Richardson, who was Vanessa Redgrave's first husband, who is also the co-founder of the Royal Court, he comes to visit the Eameses because he's obviously met them in London and things, or he's been told by Divine, you need to go and see these people. And Charles became involved in discussions about a theatre, design of a theatre for the Royal Court in sort of 55. He passes that to Zahrman, and in the end they take an existing theatre. But in what seems to be the late 40s, Alexander Knox, I think, I don't know if it's the correct date, he's talking to Tyrone Guthrie, and there's going to be an overproduction of Hamlet. And again, as Knox remembers it, it's all Charles, of course. Charles gets a great idea, we will have screens and we will project images, and then he talks about that they're going to do, have all these Renaissance things, and then they're borrowing jewellery from Geraldine Fitzgerald, who's a Hollywood actress, from all their friends, and Ray is making this enamel tray to make it look like a Renaissance tray, and then Guthrie just left the outfit, so that didn't really amount to anything, but very interesting in terms of the breadth of their interests. And it's really only, I think, in the 60s that, and I think it's this failure of Spirit in St. Louis. I think Charles had big ideas, and there's a nice letter from one woman who says when Charles was 50, so that would be 57, she spoke to him and he said, I haven't achieved anything, I have to focus on my own work, I have to get myself together, And so I think the story is much more complicated than we used to say. We used to say, about 57 they stopped making furniture and made films. I think it's in 57 they stopped doing tons and tons of other stuff. And Charles in particular had a long history of, he left his wife and child and went off to Mexico for 8 months to think about what his life was going to be, and then he obviously had another think in 41 and various moments. Because by anyone else's standards, by 1957, the Eames has done an enormous amount of stuff. If they both died then, we would have most of that furniture and a hell of a lot of really interesting films, So they're both really good questions, actually.
Questions?
So besides Charles and Ray Eames and Saul Bass, are there other modernist designers or architects in Los Angeles who have connections to Hollywood?
Well, a lot of the set designers have been trained as architects. I don't know that any of them would have gone in as modernists. One of the couples that I wanted to look at, when I was working on the Eameses, it was like, how do you classify the films? I know we haven't talked about them tonight. How do you classify these short films that might be about toys, they might be about an exhibition, they might be about the National Aquarium? And they're usually from sort of the mid-50s sponsored by people. So I was looking at all the journals of sponsored films and business films, and in the business film journal, 3 couples kept turning up. Charles and Ray Eames, Sol and Elaine Bass, and Morton and Millie Goldschall, and they were Chicago-based. Lovely graphics. One of the first companies, I think, to employ both black and Asian American designers as well. And I heard that at some stage their daughter holds the archive, and somebody was going to do a project. And Saul Bass worked on a project with them and for a couple of paper, the people that did Kleenex.
Scott tissue?
Sorry?
Is it Scott? Next was Kimberly Clark.
Kimberly Clark, yeah. And they did a little film about logos for Kimberly Clark and things. It's about 1959. And I think the only joint thing is that a package of these tissues seems to be joined to the Saltbass and Water Girl. It's not an earth-shattering design. But that's an archive that somebody should get their hands on. I think it would be, it's just a book in the making, because they did some really wonderful stuff. But your wider question is, I don't really know the extent of that. Okay,
there is an ongoing series of events this week, and tonight and tomorrow night we're running a series of events around theatre and archaeology, which is why I want to bring this to a close fairly promptly. But in doing so, I want to thank Pat, and also just remind everyone what we're missing. Since Pat's moved back to Britain, we no longer have this preoccupation with film, fashion, Hollywood and mid-century American design. It leaves a large gap in our whole worldview, I think, for the history of design. But it's been really delightful tonight to be reminded of all that and to get a sense of this interconnectedness between designing, acting, filmmaking and a host of other areas. So please join me in thanking Professor Pat Kirkham. You're of course welcome to, if we still have some drink and nibbles out now, please carry on.